What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Myriam, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today is a special episode because it wasn't recorded as a podcast interview, but as a conversation about process. Michelle Howard has hosted this conversation with Jimbo Clark and myself and a group of NeverDoneBefore participants as a part of our Seedlings program. And you can now witness what process in the art and craft of facilitation means from different perspectives. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy.
I'm dancing here. Really, I am.
Let's dance into the process.
It's called loosen up your morning, wind down your evening.
Facilitators green out.
Favorite move, people.
Morning, good afternoon, good day, good evening.
Lovely. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for the music, Myriam. Welcome, everybody, to our process forum. My name is Michelle Howard, and for those of you that I haven't met, it's been a real pleasure to be hosting the Seedlings program. And the format has been, for those of you who haven't been part of it, that each month we've had a workshop on a topic where we've done something very interactive when we've explored the theme. And then 2 weeks later, we invite some guests to come and join us and share their particular lens. So this month's theme has been about process, shape, design of your meetings, workshops, and events. And I am very excited that we've got Myriam and Jimbo Clark as our guests this month. And we've had lots of fun talking about process design, which, you would think, oh, maybe that's kind of, a bit up here. But we've had some really playful conversations about it. And I'm sure that you're going to find the session very creative and very inspiring. The process will go for about 90 minutes. And what we've done previously is a quick round of introductions. Then I hand over for Myriam and Jimbo to introduce themselves. It's more of a dialogue session. So we've got some questions that we wanted to explore, but we'll have some pause points where you can ask questions as well. So if you're pondering things, by all means, put them in the chat, but also feel free to hold on to them and speak them into the room in a few minutes' time. So welcome, everybody. I was thinking maybe for the purposes of introduction, given that we're talking about process, it would be really interesting to hear from each of you a word that inspires your thinking and your process design. So I'm going to model that for you and I'm going to hand over to somebody. So Michelle Howard, and here I am in Australia. And the word that inspires my process design is movement. And I am going to hand over to Bianca.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Good morning. My name is Bianca Witte. I'm based in Switzerland, original German. And what inspires me, if movement is in, then I would go for the next one. That would be emotion. And I do hand over to, let me have a look who are we having, Vitali.
Thank you very much. My name is Vitali. I'm from the beautiful Western Germany. So I would add iteration as a word for process design. And I'll hand it over to Laureline.
Thank you, Vitali. Laureline, based in Sweden, French originally. I would have the word output, and I can hand over to Christelle.
Hi, good morning. I'm also from Sweden. My word would maybe be visualization. And I hand over to Jimbo.
Jimbo.
My name's Jimbo. I live in Taiwan, originally from Seattle. And my word is flexibility. And I would hand it over to, and I don't know how to pronounce it, so it's a great way to say it. Myriam?
I'm Myriam. I'm in Amsterdam. And I think my word would be lightness. Oh, and I hand it over to, let's see, Anushka.
I'm Anushka. I didn't do well with the weather change in Belgium, in Europe. I'm from sunny terrain. I'm local in Brussels, Belgium, and my word would be variation. And I hand it to Kate, so we don't forget her non-video folks.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm an American, but I live in Berlin, and right now I am in Venice. And my word is journey. And Patrick.
I'm Patrick. I'm based in the Philippines. My word is imagination. So imagination is what moves me to design. I think we haven't heard yet from Iva. Is that how you pronounce Eva?
Eva. Hi, good morning. I'm Eva from Croatia. My word would be story, a story. And I pass it on to Elske.
I'm Elske from the Netherlands, and my word would be flow. And I'm handing over to Myriam.
Thank you. My name is Myriam. I'm based in Amsterdam, originally from Germany, and my word is intention. And I pass it over to Michelle. Back to Michelle. Woo!
Pick me. That always used to happen to me when they were picking sides for netball because I was so terrible at ball sports. So I can swim. Thank you, everybody. I would love to have an image of all of that. I've got to play with those ideas. What beautiful, rich words of inspiration around process. And given that this is a peer learning environment, we need to make sure that we draw on all that wisdom from our peers. And Myriam and Jimbo are such an interesting complement on this topic. Their backgrounds are different and yet have similarities, and their energy levels are different and yet bubble at the same time. So we've had a lot of fun playing with this topic. And I just thought, Myriam and Jimbo, would you like to introduce yourselves with a quick reference to what inspires you around this notion of process? What makes it interesting? Myriam, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Well, Myriam, host of the Workshops Work podcast, founder of the NeverDoneBefore community, and I don't even know whether I would call myself facilitator, so it changes on a regular basis. And what inspires me around process, I think, is the structure. So I am a creative person. There are always more ideas bubbling up in my head that I can potentially process or realize. So I have to be very strict on the process that I put upon me to make sure that I channel all the idea in a direction that eventually leads to a meaningful output. Yeah. And I pass it over to Jim.
Thank you. Maybe just a little, I was thinking about, what inspires me. And I think a lot of that grows out of my past. I think every facilitator kind of has their lineage, as it were. And mine starts with my father, who was a physical education teacher. So he was constantly running activities for kids. And I came to Taiwan in the late 80s and I started teaching, and I was the guy who people would go to for an activity. And so I have, if you want a good present perfect continuous activity, I have one, so I was very activity based. Then I worked for a number of years in an activity based learning, experiential learning company. I studied accelerated learning and NLP around accelerated learning. And that's when I met process facilitation. So my background is much more experiential than facilitation, but I met some just amazing facilitators from the ICA, the Technology of Participation, if you're familiar with it. And so what inspires me, I think, is the creation of a container for the aha moment. And that aha moment is almost never what I think it will be. There's what I hope will happen in the group, and there's what the group knows better than me what they need or what they're going to get. So so I push towards that aha moment. And then once that aha moment's happened, how do we capture it and leverage that into the future? And I'll pass it back to Michelle.
That's a really good launching off point for the next question, because when we had our workshop, we talked about the notion of a shape in terms of a process. And from my point of view, we talked about some key kind of bubbles that we deal with when we're designing a process. We talked about clear purpose. We talked about and connection with purpose. We talked about the notion of setting some agreements around the way that we want to operate. We talked about building connection and relationship. We talked about doing the work. And then we talked about looping back to purpose so that there's a sense of reflection and how we're going to move forward. And that was a shape that we played with and explored. So given what you've just said, Jimbo, and Myriam too, how is it that you approach process design? What would we see you doing if you've got to design a gathering? If I was a fly on the wall, what would I observe? Don't mind who starts.
Can I just say something that it just made me giggle, because you were talking about bubbles, and bubbles pop. I don't know if you've ever tried to blow bubbles, like chewing gum bubble. If you get too ambitious, it pops. And I think for me as a facilitator, especially when I was first starting, I always wanted to take the group very deep, and I think facilitators, by our nature and by the people we spend time with, it's very easy to want to take people very deep. But sometimes if you go too deep, the bubble pops. So getting back to the process, part of the process is for me to try to understand, especially from the key stakeholder perspective, whoever is going. Quite often when I'm coming in as an external facilitator, there's somebody who owns the process, somebody who has some level of final responsibility. And I want to make sure that the output is something that she can or he can take and do something with. And if you create something, too big for them, then it doesn't help. And if it's too small or too fixed, it doesn't help. And so I think the first part of the process is trying to understand what's the practical outcome that is being asked for from the primary stakeholder, quite often the person who's signing the check, or for me, and also has some level of responsibility for the group. So practical outcome.
And I would love to add to that, maybe as a compliment, because totally agree. And what I find tricky, and I think this is the place where I start the process and where I find maybe also the most joy and inspiration, is to speak to the stakeholder, to the main client, to understand what do they want, to then find out what is it actually that they need. And very often it's different. And I think this is a facilitative process as such. And then I interview, air quotes, every participant that will come to the workshop. Because very often what I then realize is what they expect, want, and need is again different from what the client has expected or made up in their mind. And it's only through these interviews that I find then the inspiration that would feed into the session to also give me a sense of how deep is the group actually ready to go and how deep can we guide them.
That feels like that aligns very beautifully with that first bubble, which hasn't popped yet, Jimbo, but may, around purpose. So that's a nice affirmation of that. Then what would you do? So if you've got some sense that you've grappled with purpose, what are you then going to do? What's your next step or thought or approach?
Go for a motorcycle ride. I try to get away from, the danger for me is I start to ruminate and I start getting in a little circular thinking. And so then I get maybe, I don't want to quite say the word obsessed, but it's easy for me to get sucked into the energy from the interview process. And so I tend to, the next part of the process for me would be to take a break from it and to step away a little bit, get some perspective.
I'm so envious. I approach it the entire opposite way. So I just draft something. And those of you who know me a little bit in my way of working, I tend to do too quickly and then I take a step back. But this really helps me in my thinking process. So I would just map out, I go in Session Lab. I love Session Lab. And then just draft an agenda or a flow, how it came to being, and to take some inspiration from the interviews. And then I put it away. And then I kind of just let it sink. But I need to have this kind of messy, usually there's too much stuff in there and too many ideas. And then I step back, I let it sink and let all the kind of synapses link to each other. And then I would go back and think of the best perfect outcome that I would like to achieve, and then backward engineer whether the before last exercise would actually lead to this outcome, and what do we need in the exercise before to get to the outcome that would then lead us to the result.
And I'm so jealous of you, because what happens when I finish my motorcycle ride and everything is I look at everything and go, gosh, what I thought I had a plan. What was it? And so I should probably do what you do and write some notes. I think the other thing that as I'm thinking about it from a linear standpoint, the other thing that I would always make sure that I do is I want to be clear on the practical outcomes, but I also want to be clear on the experiential intent. And so these are the two questions I will always ask before even the contracting or anything, is the practical outcomes and the experiential intent, because that's going to determine to a certain degree the timing and the amount of time. Because if they have very clear practical outcomes and they don't care about the experiential intent, or let's just get to work, everyone wants to work, great, then we can have a shorter, more focused program. But if they say, well, this team doesn't really know each other, we want to give them a chance to get to know each other, and it'd be nice if we could go outside, would be good, and suddenly all of a sudden all these little experiential pieces, which can be very, very critical to the overall outcome and the getting of things done after the program. So then I'm constantly trying to blend that experiential intent with the practical outcome, because if you get one or the other, but without both, then I wouldn't feel good at the end of the day. I would have that feeling of, and not to say that's a bad thing, because it happens often enough, but when you've hit it perfectly and you hit the group and you end up with the results that you want, and when you don't. And usually it's when I focused on one or the other at the expense of the other.
It's a really nice reminder of what we talked about in the workshop. And those of you who are there remember we talked about the head and the heart, and the head being the focus on outcome and being driven towards achievement and closure and delivery, and the heart being the work that we do to maintain the health and the well-being of the group, so that when we step back as facilitators, then the group still has the glue and what it needs to be able to work together to implement the outcome. So I really love that those two things sit alongside each other, and we have to be mindful of both. Also, what I'm hearing in what you've said is that there is no single right way, and that what everyone here can do is cherry pick what they think is going to work for them and reflect on their own practice and take bits away that are going to complement what suits your style. You might be the big lists session lab person and that works really well for you. You might have a brain that is very visual and you need to draw. Whatever those things are, to find what suits your style, I think is really important, not to just adopt something else that someone else says is a good idea. Yeah.
And maybe to add one practical thing, what I like to do is I would color code the exercises or the steps we're taking throughout the flow, so that I would distinguish between something that is one directional, such as explanations or content, and then there's small group exercises. So when is the group breaking out? And then there's kind of debriefing, large group sharing, and energizers and breaks. So I have 5 colors. And then if I look at the flow from a bird's perspective, I see, is there enough variation? Is it too speech heavy, maybe too much breakout, maybe too much sharing, so that I get a feeling of where the group also goes energy-wise? Because I think if we have too many breakout sessions in too little of a time, this can be as draining energy-wise as too much input and one-directional content talk.
Can I build on this? And I guess it's coming back to this notion that everybody has their own style and approach. But I'm wondering whether for both of you, and that every situation is different. And I think that's the challenging thing when we're trying to learn about process. There is no one approach. You know, every session we run is very bespoke. So I'm curious, are there things that you hold on to that are kind of non-negotiables in your process that you will use or stick to or integrate regardless of the situation? And then things which are mutable, which are optional, which are variable, and you'll really like bolt on to fit the particular circumstance or need. What are the negotiables and the non-negotiables when you think about process?
Love that question. A definite non-negotiable is participation. So breaking the group into smaller groups and to really get them to mingle and to have this randomly. So I love online facilitation for exactly that purpose, because we have the random allocation of the breakout rooms. And I think this just democratizes the entire process. So non-negotiable is to flatten the room. So no hierarchy, every voice is just the same. And constant reshuffling of the group so that everyone gets to speak with everyone else. Negotiable are the tools to some extent. So sometimes I love to work with online whiteboards, but only if it's needed. And I would love to say that I'm varying the tools depending on the purpose of the session. And I think there's so many now different online video conferencing tools. I would love to play more with which one to choose depending on the intention of the session. But unfortunately, there's very often just a restriction from the client side.
Thank you, Jimbo.
Yeah, for me, when I think about non-negotiables, the first one that comes to mind is my energy is non-negotiable. Me going to bed early the night before. So like when I have a full day session, especially because I live in Taiwan, you know, in the before days when we used to travel to do and used to meet face to face, 90% of my work was away from home. And so I would eat in my room and sleep at 8 o'clock. And I would always think that I am the person who has to be here with all of my energy. And so that's the non-negotiable for me, is I have to care for myself in a way where I can bring it. And if I'm in the midst of a high season of work, which usually, I don't know about other people, but my work tends to be very, very seasonal, then self-care becomes even more important. My second non-negotiable, which I'm not as good at, but I try really hard, is to fall in love with the group. And so as I am walking into the room, my mental approach is, how can I love this group? And the third non-negotiable for me, and I usually put this into my, opening, contracting, however you call it, is the invitation is for you to relax and have fun today, but I can't make you do that. But my promise to you is I will. So I will relax. I will have fun. I will enjoy today because I believe you will learn more, do more, get more done today if you're relaxed and having fun. And so my non-negotiable is I'm going to have fun. So if I want to dance, I dance. If people in groups and I'm off in the corner just doing Jimbo. And that's kind of what I think is helpful for us as facilitators to figure out who I am in the room and be that. And then allow that attraction to determine whether or not clients find you or not, or whether or not you're invited to do this or not, is because you're wholly yourself and you're going to get business being you. rather than feeling like I need to fit a mold of what a facilitator is or whatever.
Thank you so much, Jimbo. Yes, yes. And what comes to my mind, building on what you just said, is the word that comes to my mind is authenticity. So non-negotiable, I want to be my full and best self, because if I'm wearing a mask, then I invite all the others to wear masks, and this energy spills over, as you explained. And therefore, for me, another non-negotiable is how to start a session. So when it's on site, I always have M&Ms, and I would welcome every participant personally with a handshake and with a bowl of M&Ms and help them to feel comfortable. And in the online space, it would be with music, with a smile, with a little bit of dancing, just also to get myself into the movement and the energy.
Thank you. I'm noticing there's some interesting comments in the chat around, and this comes perhaps back to your point, Jimbo, around flexibility. Let's have a little question pause. There seems to be some curiosity around the focus earlier on in relation to purpose. And what happens when you get in the room and you realize that maybe not everybody is aligned on that purpose? What do you then do with your process? Does that capture anyone? There's been a bit of commentary in the chat. Anybody want to frame that question differently?
You frame it one more time? Or yeah.
Patrick, you want to have a go?
Go ahead, Patrick. No, Patrick, go for it. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this question might be a bit tangent from what you mentioned, Michelle, but what I'm curious about is being that process is so important to the preparation of a workshop. At what point, if, for example, something unexpected happens, expectations are unmet, how do you know when to let go of the process? Or how do you know when to redo something because it's not working? So what are the signs, or you could say the flags to watch out for, if I may ask?
Such a good question. Who wants to play?
Ooh, that's a hard one. At some level, I have to trust that I'm here for a purpose. We're talking about purpose. That for me, that question usually pops up to me, Patrick, at 11 o'clock at night, the night before. It pops up at 7:30 in the morning as I'm brushing my teeth. It's almost always that rumination, anxiety, uncertainty. Myriam, we had talked earlier about imposter syndrome, and so quite often the spanners or the things, the unexpected things, are things that are happening inside of me that are keeping me from being really connected to the group. And this may not be answering your question, but I do have like routines that I go through to help me through that. And one of them is, if I don't go into this room today, who else is going to do it? Somehow the organization, the group has agreed to me being there. And if I don't do it, no one is coming to save me. No one is coming to save the group. The other is that I'm not doing this alone, that even if I'm facilitating alone, once I walk into a group and once we walk into the Zoom together, as it were, it's us. It's not my wisdom. It's not my ability. It's ours. And so do I trust the group? So it's not just about trusting me, it's about trusting the group. Yeah. And
to enable the group to share the responsibility. I think that's important. Yeah. So how do I notice that I need to change the process? I think it depends on the group. There are some groups or individuals in the group that are outspoken, that would just tell you in your face, which is maybe the most disruptive situation and scary. On the other hand, it's then an opportunity to pick them up and to bring it back into the room and to ask the entire group the question, okay, does everyone align with that? Are we on the wrong track? And do we need to reshuffle? More subtle with groups that maybe, I think in groups where you have a lot of power differences or hierarchy, these would be the group where the participants are less outspoken, unless it is the client directly who says, I don't want that. Happened to me recently, which is then different, because then you have, as a facilitator, to decide, okay, am I going with the client? Am I sensing the group? Am I asking and inviting the group? And who's going to save me? And so in the situation where there is a lot of power difference or hierarchy, and then I would sense that something is off. So there's maybe nobody would speak if I ask a question into the room. Maybe there's more going on in the chat, or you see just in the space, I think you feel the discomfort in the bodies. And online, it's maybe if more go off camera, or you can see that the light in the faces change. So this shows you that they're opening different tabs and they might be on different screens. And that's often a sign that, okay, something is going, they try to flee, right? They try to get away from the space because something is uncomfortable. And I think this is a moment to just ask the space.
And I would add, we talked about last time the importance of kind of checking in very early in a session and testing for alignment. And if there's a sense, and I think that's such a good insight, Myriam, around power, if there's a sense that there is a power imbalance and people don't feel comfortable speaking up, if I'm asking a question early in the session, something like, what would success look like for you today? And I feel there's a power imbalance, I wouldn't expect everybody to speak that into the room because some people may not feel at all comfortable with that. So what are the other ways that people could share that? Would they choose someone they trust and share that one-on-one? Would they write it down and then we put all of that up on the wall? So I think just being conscious of that really early testing, it's a litmus test for you to understand where the group is at. And as you're alluding to, Patrick, whether you might need to tweak things, because there are elements of the group that need something very different. Yeah. And really interesting, the questions that are coming up around loyalty and who do you serve in the room? Who does your process serve? So maybe that would be a fun thing, Myriam and Jimbo, for you to address. Who do you serve and who does your process serve when you're in the room?
I can go first with a fully honest answer. I wish I would. I was very inspired, and maybe it was even in an interview with you, Jimbo, by one of my podcast guests who said the loyalty is 100% to the client because they're the owner of the process, they hired you. So it's your job to make sure that they get the results that they need. My very personal problem is that I feel empathy with the group and I feel in service with the group. So in these situations where there is an imbalance and I can sense that my direct client wants something different than the group, I sense this responsibility for me that I almost must manipulate the group to kind of squeeze them into the client's wish. And I'm not good at that. So although I envy those who can be in full service of their clients, I tend to be more in service and have loyalty to the group.
And that would, Myriam, that would challenge the traditional definition of facilitation. So, historically, facilitation is about being at the service of the group. So, I'm just curious whether there are other terms that better describe that loyalty to a client. Would you come and share this for me? This is what I need to happen. I don't know. I'm just, I'm stirring the pot a little bit by saying that. But traditionally, facilitation is very much about being at the service of the people in the room and what they need. Jimbo, sorry.
So I met like I said before, I met facilitation through Larry Philbrook of the ICA in Taiwan. And I was actually the person who introduced him to the company I was working for. And so I was internal to the company. And so my first 3 years of facilitation was hanging posters and, getting, cutting paper and stuff for Larry, but also from the client side, not from the facilitator side. And so for me, I look at facilitation as a way of reconfiguring individuals into a more powerful configuration to achieve something that they couldn't have in their previous configuration. So this is hand, this is finger, this is shaka shaka. It's the same components, but we're putting them together for a different purpose. And to me, that's what facilitation is. But if I am a facilitator for hire, then that's where that practical outcome comes into play. And the pushback on the practical outcome needs to come before the members of the group walk in. And so as Myriam was talking about doing the interviews and finding out, the hardest part of facilitation is everything you do before you open the door, before you turn on the Zoom. Once you're in flow with the group and once we are a group, it will have a beginning and it's going to have an end. And if we're an outside facilitator, and we're not all, but if we're an outside facilitator, when that process ends, we close the computer or we get on the airplane and have our little glass of champagne and we say, oh my, didn't we do a wonderful job today? And they're stuck holding it, right? And so if we empower people, and I saw this happen from the internal perspective where I'm a great lover of open space, and you get people, the group is enthused and all these ideas and everything. And then if the output is bigger than the organization's capability to eat, you can have a beautiful buffet table of ideas, but really all they wanted was soup. And so we as facilitators, I think we need to be, pruning a little bit. So I think it's not an either or. And my deeper purpose in life is to reduce the level of suffering in organizations. And so that's how, maybe my approach around the human side is there a way that we can reduce the level of suffering while we still deliver on the things we need to deliver on?
Myriam, I'm noticing you've got something you want to add, but I'm noticing there are some questions that people are pondering. So let's just have a little opportunity for those things that are, mulling around, the ideas, the thoughts, the questions that you've got. Let's have a little moment for people to put those out into the room and see what Myriam and Jimbo have to say. What questions have been coming up for you?
Hello, listener. Are you tired of listening to my podcast voice praising our sponsor Session Lab in each episode? I think it's time to pass the mic over to you. So if you are as much of a Session Lab fan and user as I am, please share your experience and praise, and don't be shy of add a sentence of self-promo. Send me your soundbite and you might hear yourself on the next show and find your name and URL in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.